Bin Laden's move to the Sudan was not a hasty decision or one made strictly under duress. Years before 1991, he had begun to realize that the Saudi regime was growing increasingly frustrated with him. He had started considering other locations. When the tipping point came, the Saudis tried to silence him, like confiscating his passport. He already had a new base lined up. One option had always been to return to Afghanistan when he had flourished in the past. Another was to set up a new base in the Sudan. In 1989, when the National Islamic Front took control of Sudan in a coup, declaring a desire to turn Khartoum into the center of an international Islamic network, the National Islamic Front, also known as the NIF, sent an invitation to bin Laden to move his organization to the country. It was then that he began to consider Sudan seriously. He sent operatives, led by Abu Hajir, to meet with the new Sudanese leaders and evaluate the country's vulnerability as a base of operations. Abu Hajir came back with a positive report, telling bin Laden and other al-Qaeda members that the NIF leaders were devout Muslims, that al-Qaeda would have the necessary freedom to operate effectively from the country. Abu Hajir brought back books written by INF leader Dr. Hassan al-Turabi, whom al-Qaeda members tended to mistrust because he had studied at the Sorbonne. Abu Hajir said, quote, "Studying in Europe doesn't make someone a bad person. Turabi is a noted scholar. He has memorized the Quran. He knows a lot about Islamic law, and in fact, for 40 years, he served dawah, the act of inviting others to study Islam," end quote, sometimes with the aim of converting others. Bin Laden made a deal with Turabi and the Sudanese authorities whereby would give al-Qaeda the freedom to operate, and in exchange, he would invest in the country and help the regime fight the Christian separatists in the south. Once the deal was finalized, bin Laden sent Jamal al-Fadl, then his personal secretary, and others to prepare for his arrival. It was in 1991 that the preparations were completed and the move accomplished. Every Thursday after sunset prayers, all al-Qaeda members in Khartoum gathered at one of the farms the organization owned to hear a lecture given by bin Laden with someone else on jihad and on the organization's mission. The first such meeting, bin Laden told his followers that the mission in Sudan would be to build al-Qaeda, eventually turning it into an international network that would not only support others waging jihad, but which also would be capable of launching its own operations. From 1992 to 1995, as events such as the First Gulf War and the conflict in Somalia shaped the narrative of the terror network, operatives undertook the large-scale procurement of equipment and supplies that began to mark al-Qaeda's institutional and operational evolution. Isam al-Ridi was at his home in Texas when the phone rang on a fall day in 1993. "Assalamu alaikum, my brother," he returned, the voice belonging to Wadi al-Hajj. Al-Hajj had offered the traditional greeting, "Peace be unto you." "Wassalam al-salaikum, Abu Abdallah Lubani," Ridi explained, returning the greeting, "How are you?" "Alhamdulillah," al-Hajj replied, "Praise be to God." "And yourself?" "Alhamdulillah." "So why are you calling, my friend? What can I do for you?" "I've got a message from the Sheikh." "I guessed as much," Ridi replied with a hearty laugh. It was usually with some request from bin Laden that his old friend al-Hajj called from these days. "So what can I do for Abu Abdallah?" Ridi continued, referring to bin Laden by one of his aliases, the father Abdullah. Abdullah is the name of bin Laden's eldest son, and referring to him thus was an expression of respect, as it's considered a great honor in the Muslim world to have a son. "He wants you to buy an airplane for him," al-Hajj replied. He explained that bin Laden had asked that the plane be delivered to Khartoum International Airport. An airplane? As a trained pilot and flight instructor, Isam already knew how to go about purchasing a plane. What type of plane does Abu Abdallah want? And how much is he willing to spend? "Something that has a range of more than 2,000 miles, al-Hajj replied, for no more than $350,000. He explained that bin Laden wanted to transport Stinger missiles from Peshawar to Khartoum. "You have to be careful transporting weapons, you know," Ridi said. "You need to make sure you get permission from the countries on both ends, or you'll find yourself in trouble." al-Hajj replied, "Don't worry. We got permission from the authorities in Peshawar and Khartoum. But that's why we need the 2,000 mile. We can't risk running out of fuel and being forced to land somewhere. It will be chaos. Reedy found a suitable plane. The seller even agreed to give him a 9% commission for arranging the purpose. In fact, Reedy chose not to divulge to El Hajj. In any case, the profit was never realized. Inexplicably, Wadi El Hajj dropped the allowance for the plane to 250,000. This is the price the sheikh had decided on. So see what you can do, he told Reedy. Reedy argued that the terms were impossible. He knew what was out there. They would never be able to get what they wanted for 250,000. At last, however, he found a decommissioned military aircraft for 210,000 that had a range of 1,500 miles. It's in storage in Tucson, Arizona, and it hadn't been used in a while, he told El Hajj, so I need to get it checked out and fixed. When El Hajj asked him how he would get it to the airport, Reedy replied, I'll fly it there myself. But El Hajj said he had one final request to convey to bin Laden, and that was that bin Laden wanted Reedy to work for him as a pilot. Reedy demurred, suggesting that they discuss the offer in Khartoum. He had the plane refurbished and repainted, updated its equipment, and took off from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, minus the 65-degree weather, while flying caused the plane to malfunction. A window cracked on the way. It took him a week to get there. El Hajj met him at the airport and inspected the plane. He was full of praise for Reedy. It looks good, well done. Reedy shrugged. For what it cost, it's good. The journey had exhausted him. El Hajj took him to his own home, where they later dined with Osama bin Laden, to whom Reedy agreed and presented the keys to the aircraft. He agreed to meet at the airport the following morning so that bin Laden could inspect the plane himself. Reedy rose early to clean it. The exterior was dirty from the flight. But bin Laden failed to show at the appointed time, and Reedy spent several idle hours before getting in touch with Wadi al-Hajj, who apologized and summoned him to the office for a meeting. Reedy arrived at a residential building in the Riyadh neighborhood of Khartoum. Wadi al-Hajj, manning the front desk, greeted Reedy warmly. Besides performing the duties he had finished from Reedy, he had taken over bin Laden's secretary following the departure of Jamal al-Fadl, one of the first members of al-Qaeda. Jamal al-Fadl, who was Sudanese, had spent several weeks training Wadi al-Hajj in the management of the office. Beyond al-Hajj's desk was an office that belonged to Abu Jafar, also known as Abu Taj al-Iraqi, bin Laden's business manager. The interior office was bin Laden's. Reedy was ushered inside bin Laden's office by al-Hajj. Bin Laden was wearing a white toa, a traditional Arab garment, and had a black beard. He said to Reedy, I'm sorry for not coming this morning. He spoke quietly, with a Saudi accent, his voice seeming to betray a hint of shyness. But I've got a new request for you. I'd like for you to stay here in the Sudan and work for me. I'll pay you $1,200 a month. Reedy replied, Before we discuss the job any further, there's something I need to say to you at a personal level. You may know that when we were both in Afghanistan, I resented the fact that you were a rich man with no military background or experience trying to be a military leader. That was one of the reasons I left Afghanistan. Now that you have the experience, it's a different situation, so my view has changed. Bin Laden had thanked Reedy and explained the particulars of the job. You will fly the plane for me personally. You will use it for crop dusting. Bin Laden owned farms that grew crops for which vegetable oil was produced. And you'll fly the crops to other countries to be sold. That's 3 jobs, Reedy replied. Which one is for $1,200? That's for all 3. This, you should know, is the highest I'm paying my officers. It may be the highest, but I've heard that there is a high inflation here in Khartoum, Reedy replied. I've also heard that schools are expensive for expatriates. So is furniture. Bin Laden replied, that's the highest, so consider it. And just so you know, in case you do still hear of any of your concerns, this is not jihad. This is strictly business.